bullet wasn't meant for her. That's the part people always forget when they hear the story, that Addie was just trying to get to her car. It was a Tuesday. She remembered because Tuesdays were the days she worked a double at Hartwell General's basement cafeteria, 7 in the morning until the dinner rush thinned out around 8 at night. 13 hours on her feet. 13 hours of scrambled eggs and soup ladles and learning to smile at people who never once looked at her face. She was 26 years old and her lower back ached like she was 60, and all she wanted was to get home before her grandmother fell asleep waiting up for her. The parking garage attached to Hartwell General was the kind of place that felt wrong even on bright days. 4 levels of concrete and flickering fluorescence, always smelling faintly of motor oil and something worse underneath. The hospital had been promising to upgrade the lighting for 2 years. They hadn't. Addie was on the 2nd level, keys already in her hand, when she heard the boy crying. Not a scared cry, a confused one. The kind children make when something has happened that their brain hasn't finished processing yet. She stopped walking. She looked. He was maybe 7 years old, standing between 2 parked SUVs, wearing a blazer that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His dark hair was messed up on one side, like he'd been grabbed and then let go. He was staring at a man in a grey jacket who was crouched in front of him, speaking low and fast in a tone that did not match the words. Whatever the words were, the tone was "do not run, do not scream." Addie didn't think. She told herself later that she had thought, that she'd made some conscious calculation. But that was a lie she invented to make herself sound rational. What actually happened was that her body moved before her mind agreed to it. She walked toward them, fast, heels loud on the concrete, and she said loudly and clearly, "Hey, Owen, there you are." The boy looked at her. He had never seen her in his life. His eyes were wide and wet, and for one suspended second, he didn't know what to do with what she was offering him. Then he ran to her. He crashed into her side, both arms wrapping around her waist, face pressed into her cafeteria uniform, and she felt the tremble in his small shoulders and understood immediately that she had read this right. The man in the grey jacket stood up. He was taller than she'd realized. He didn't look alarmed. That was the part that frightened her. He just looked recalculating. She kept her voice steady. She had no idea how. "That's so." The man smiled. It didn't reach anything above his jaw. "That's so," she said back. He took one step toward them. She moved the boy behind her without thinking, and she had just enough time to register that the man's right hand had come up, that something dark and angular was in it. Before the sound happened, one flat crack, like a board breaking, and then pain, white and absolute, in her left shoulder, and then the concrete coming up to meet her. She heard the boy screaming. She heard running, boots, multiple sets, from somewhere she couldn't see. She heard a voice she did not recognize, low and controlled and very cold, say, "Get him out of here! Somebody get him out of here right now!" Then she didn't hear anything at all. The first thing she was aware of was a ceiling. White, textured. The kind of ceiling she'd stared at in every hospital room she'd ever been in, which, given the last 4 years with her grandmother's health, was more than she could count. She knew where she was before she understood how she'd gotten there. The second thing she was aware of was that her left arm would not move properly, and that there was a man sitting in the chair beside her bed who was not a doctor. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, dark-suited, with the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm. It came from practice. Dark eyes. A jaw that looked like it had been cut rather than grown. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, and he didn't say anything when she opened her eyes, just waited, like he'd learned long ago that speaking first cost something. "The boy," Addie said. Her voice came out rough and strange. "He's safe." The man's voice was quiet, precise. He wasn't hurt. She let out a breath she'd been holding since the parking garage. "He's my son," the man said. "His name is James." She turned her head to look at him fully. "I'm glad he's okay. You took a bullet for him. I didn't take it on purpose. I was between him and... You put yourself between my son and a man who was pointing a gun at him." He said it without any inflection, like he was reciting something he needed to be accurate about. On purpose or not, that is what happened. Addie didn't know what to say to that. She looked back at the ceiling. "My name is Sterling," the man said. "Garrett Sterling." The name landed somewhere in the back of her memory and rattled something loose. Sterling. She'd seen that name on the side of the building downtown, Sterling Group, in silver letters 6 stories high. She'd seen it on the news once, something about a port contract, something about federal inquiries that had quietly disappeared. She'd seen it on the face of a man in a photograph, standing next to a senator, both of them smiling the way people smile when they've already decided the outcome. She looked at him again. "Okay," she said. "I want to compensate you," he said. "For what happened, I don't need compensation, your medical bills. I work here. I have insurance," she paused. "Had insurance. I'm going to lose the shift differential if I'm out more than 3 days. She hadn't meant to say that last part. It came out before she could stop it. Something shifted in his face. Not quite emotion, more like the recognition of it. How long have you worked in the cafeteria? 2 years before that? She looked at him. Why? I'm trying to understand who you are. I'm nobody, she said. I'm just someone who was in the wrong place. No, he said. You're someone who was in exactly the right place. For my son. He was quiet for a moment. Then, James won't stop asking about you. He asked the nurses. He asked my security team. He's been sitting outside this room for the last 4 hours, and I had to physically bring him to the waiting area and promise him you were all right before he would eat anything. Addie felt something pull in her chest that had nothing to do with her shoulder. He can come in, she said, if he wants. Garrett Sterling looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the door, and opened it. She heard footsteps before she saw the boy, small and quick and deliberate. And then James Sterling was standing in the doorway, with his blazer now rumpled, and his eyes still a little swollen, and he was looking at her with an expression so serious. It made her want to cry for some reason she couldn't immediately name. Hi, she said. Hi, he said. He came to the side of the bed, not running this time, walking carefully like he'd been told to be gentle. He looked at her bandaged shoulder and then back at her face. Does it hurt? Not as much as it's going to later, she said honestly. He almost smiled at that. I'm James, I know. I'm Addie, he repeated, like he was filing it somewhere important. Thank you for helping me. She looked at this small, serious child in his expensive, wrinkled blazer, and she thought about her grandmother at home, probably asleep in the chair by the TV because she always fell asleep in the chair and never admitted it. She thought about the double shift she wouldn't be able to finish. She thought about how the man in the grey jacket had looked at her after she'd been shot. Not alarmed, just recalculating. And she knew, with the particular clarity of people who have spent most of their lives paying attention to things that might hurt them, that this was not over. You're welcome, she said. Don't do anything to scare me like that again. He nodded, very solemn. I won't. She was discharged 48 hours later. She hadn't asked for anything. She hadn't asked Garrett Sterling to cover her medical costs, hadn't asked him to have someone drive her home, hadn't asked for the envelope that appeared on her bedside table, with her name on it in handwriting she didn't recognize. She pushed it back at the nurse. The nurse pushed it back at her. She left it on the chair. She got home by bus, shoulder in a sling, and found her grandmother standing at the stove making oatmeal at 11 in the morning, which meant Graham had heard something and was coping the way she always coped, through the production of breakfast food at inappropriate hours. I saw the news, Graham said without turning around. It's fine, I'm fine, you were shot, I know. I was there. Graham turned around then, and Addie saw what she always tried not to see. How much smaller her grandmother had gotten in the last year, how the light had retreated somewhat from her eyes, how her hands trembled when she was worried. Adelaide Rose Mercer, she said, which was the full name and therefore not good. Sit down. Addie sat down. She didn't go back to work for 6 days. On the 3rd day, she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was Garrett Sterling, who said her name once, then said he needed to speak with her, then left a number and hung up. No explanation, no warmth. Just the facts of the situation, arranged in order. She called back because she was not, fundamentally, someone who ignored things she needed to deal with. He answered on the first ring. Mr. Sterling, she said. Addie. Her name in his voice had an odd quality, like he'd been practicing saying it correctly. I need to ask you something. Okay. The man in the parking garage, he wasn't random. She'd already assumed this. No, he was hired. A pause. There are people who believe they can use my son to get to me. This has happened before, in smaller ways. But this, another pause. Longer. I underestimated the level of risk. I'm glad he's okay, Addie said again, because it was the only thing she knew to be true. I want to hire you, Garrett said. I work in a hospital cafeteria. I know where you work, so you know that nothing about my background qualifies me for anything you might need. I need someone James trusts. He said it quietly. He has not trusted anyone quickly since his mother died. He trusted you in 4 seconds in a parking garage, and he has not stopped talking about you since. I need someone in the house, not security, not staff, someone James will actually talk to. Someone he chose. A beat. He chose you. Addie sat with this for a moment. What exactly are you asking? I'm asking you to come and stay at my house. Help look after James. Be present. You'll have your own rooms, your own schedule as much as possible, and I'll compensate you fairly. He paused again. I'm also asking because if the people who hired that man find out who you are, and they will, you're not safe in your apartment. She thought about Graham. I have my grandmother. She lives with me. She can come. Addie almost laughed. You're going to take in my grandmother, if that's what it takes. He didn't say it like it was a concession. He said it like it was a simple calculation, like the variables had been assessed and this was the outcome. "I don't know anything about you," she said. "I know. People say things about you. About your business. People say a lot of things. Are any of them true?" A very long pause. "Some of them." She appreciated that. She didn't know why. She thought she should hang up. She thought she should say no firmly and go back to her 6-day recovery and her grandmother's oatmeal and her cafeteria shift that was waiting for her when the sling came off. She thought about the man in the grey jacket, recalculating. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking." She said yes 4 days later. She told herself it was practical, that it was about Graham, about safety, about the fact that someone had shot her and the person behind it was still walking around with unfinished business. She told herself these things in the bathroom mirror in the mornings while she changed her shoulder bandage and tried not to wince. She did not tell herself it was because James Sterling had looked at her like she was someone worth looking at. The Sterling house was not what she expected. She'd expected something cold, all glass and sharp angles, the kind of house that was more statement than shelter. What she found instead was a brownstone in the quieter part of the city, wide and warm-windowed, with a library on the second floor that smelled like the good kind of old paper, and a kitchen that actually looked used. James was waiting on the front steps when the car pulled up. He was wearing a different blazer. He still looked too serious for 7. When Addie got out of the car, still careful with her left arm, he walked down the 3 steps and stood in front of her and said, "I picked your room. I hope that's okay. It has a window seat. I like window seats," she said. "I know," I guessed. Garrett Sterling was standing in the doorway, watching this exchange with an expression she still couldn't fully read. He'd looked. She was beginning to understand, carefully unreadable for a very long time, and whatever lived underneath it had learned to stay put. "Welcome," he said. It wasn't warm, exactly, but it was real. The first 2 weeks were careful. Garrett said good morning and good night and asked once, formally, whether her shoulder was healing properly. James made sure she saw the window seat approximately 4 times before accepting that she'd noticed it. Graham settled in with a speed that was either impressive or slightly alarming, and by the end of the first week was playing cards with the head of household security, a quiet man named Daniel, who seemed both delighted and baffled by her. Addie learned the rhythms of the house. She learned that James ate breakfast with his father every morning when Garrett was home, and that this was not negotiable. Not because it was demanded, but because James arranged it that way himself, setting 2 places, appearing in the kitchen at 7 sharp, waiting without being told. She learned that Garrett worked until very late and woke up early, and that the light in his office was usually on when she got up for water at 2 in the morning. She learned that he read in the library on Sunday afternoons, real books, not screens, and that he thought he was alone during those hours. She learned that he was not as unreachable as he appeared. She learned it slowly, the way you learn things that matter, in small and unannounced moments. The afternoon she found him sitting on the library floor with James, explaining something about history, with a patience that didn't match the man she'd first seen in her hospital room. The evening she came downstairs for a glass of water and found him standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee. Not working, just standing there in the dark and the quiet. And he turned when he heard her and didn't make any effort to look like he hadn't been standing there, just being still. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Sometimes." She poured her water. She almost went back upstairs. She didn't. "What do you do when you can't sleep?" "Usually I work, but not tonight." "Not tonight," he agreed. She sat down at the kitchen table. He stayed at the window for a moment, then turned and sat down across from her, and they drank their respective things in silence for a while, and it was strange. Comfortable in a way she hadn't expected. Like they'd already agreed on something without having to say it. "James told me you're teaching him to play rummy," Garrett said. "My grandmother is, actually. I just supervise. He told me she cheats." "She does. It's a teaching method. He's getting very good at catching it." Something moved across Esseret's face that was close to a smile. "He laughs more," he said after a moment. "Since you came." He wasn't looking at her when he said it. He was looking at his coffee cup. "I noticed that." Addie didn't say anything. She wasn't sure what to say. "I didn't do well after his mother died," Garrett said, still not looking up. "I kept things running. The house, the business, his schedule. I thought keeping things running was the same as being present." He was quiet. "James needed something I didn't know how to give him. He needed someone to pick him," Addie said. "You can't manufacture that." Garrett looked at her then. "He picked me in a parking garage," she said. "That wasn't about me specifically. That was about him being ready to trust someone, and I happened to be there. He would have found that person eventually." She paused. "But I'm glad it was me." Garrett said nothing for a long moment. Then quietly, "So am I. The threat materialized on a Wednesday the way most of the worst things did, on an ordinary day with no warning weather. Garrett's head of security, not Daniel, someone above Daniel, a sharp-eyed woman named Torres, who Addie had spoken to exactly twice, came to find Addie in the kitchen at 7 in the morning with an expression that did not allow for small talk. "We need you and your grandmother and James in the safe room," she said. "Now what's happening? The man from the garage, he wasn't working alone. We've had a credible threat against the house." Addie put down her spatula. "James is upstairs. I know. Go." What happened in the next 3 hours was something Addie didn't fully process until much later. When she was sitting on the floor of the safe room with James pressed against her side and Graham's hand in hers, listening to sounds she couldn't identify from somewhere in the house. Sounds that were controlled and purposeful and that she understood, without being told, were Garrett's people doing their jobs. James was very still. He was too old for his age, she'd noticed, in the way that children are when they've experienced things that don't have a language yet. "It's going to be okay," she told him. "You don't know that," he said. "I know that this room was built so that it would be," she said. "And I know that your dad has very serious people on his side." James was quiet for a moment. "Are you scared?" "Yes," she said. "A little." "Are you?" "Yes, that's allowed." He leaned his head against her uninjured shoulder and didn't say anything else, and she kept her arm around him, and Graham sat across from them doing something remarkably close to praying, which Graham hadn't done in 40 years. When the door opened, it was Garrett. He looked worse than she'd seen him, jacket gone, a cut above his left eyebrow that someone had put a bandage over carelessly. But he was standing, and he looked at all three of them, and something in his face changed in a way that had nothing to do with business calculations. "We're clear," he said. James got up and walked to him without running, that same careful walk, and Garrett crouched down and held onto his son for a long moment without speaking, and Addie looked away because it felt private. She looked at Graham. Graham looked back at her with an expression that contained several opinions she was choosing not to voice. 3 days after that, Garrett knocked on her door. She opened it. He was standing in the hallway looking like a man who had decided something, and was now annoyed at having decided it. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay, I've been managing this wrong." He said it briskly, like a professional assessment. "You came here under circumstances that were, I put you in a position where you couldn't reasonably refuse. You had no safety. You had your grandmother. You had a shoulder that wasn't healed. And I offered you the only option that made sense given all of that." He stopped. "That wasn't fair." Addie leaned against the doorframe. "I said yes. I know what you said. I'm telling you what the circumstances were. Are you trying to apologize?" "I'm trying to give you an honest accounting, Mr. Sterling." She said it gently. "I've made my own choices my whole life under circumstances that weren't fair. That's just called being a person." She looked at him. "Is that what you came to say?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then, no. What did you come to say?" He looked at the floor, then back at her, and whatever careful practice had lived on his face for a long time was not entirely there anymore. "I came to say that I would like you to stay. Not because of James. Not because of security considerations." He stopped. "Because of you." Addie didn't say anything. "James already thinks of you as, he doesn't say it, but I can see it when he's with you." Garrett paused. "I think about you more than I think about things I'm supposed to be thinking about. That hasn't happened to me in a very long time. I don't know how to say that in a way that isn't." He stopped again, and for the first time she saw something that was genuinely uncomfortable in him, and she found it, strangely, more appealing than anything controlled he'd ever said. "I just wanted you to know it." "I know it," she said quietly. He looked at her. "I think about you too," she said, in case that wasn't obvious. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, not rushing anything, he reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, not urgently, just carefully, the way you hold something you understand to be breakable, and she let him. They stood like that in the hallway for a while, not talking, not needing to. Somewhere downstairs, she could hear James teaching Graham a card game she was certainly going to cheat at, and her grandmother's laughter rising through the house, and it occurred to Addie, not for the first time, that the things that saved you were rarely the things you went looking for. She had gone to her car on a Tuesday night. She had heard a boy crying. She had not thought. She had just moved. And here, on the other side of all of it, was a hallway and a quiet man and a serious child who had looked at her and decided she was someone worth trusting, and her grandmother laughing in a house that felt, improbably, like it might become a home. She held on to Garrett Sterling's hand and didn't let go.